In his 1995 book, The Demon-Haunted World, astronomer and science communicator Carl Sagan attempted to teach his audience about the power of the scientific method and the advantages of a skeptical worldview. As part of that project, the book also sees him wandering off into some extremely misguided media criticism. For example, Sagan takes shots at Star Trek because the series, and this is a quote, often ignores the most elementary scientific facts. Sagan takes particular issue with the show for portraying so many alien species as humanoids who are able to interbreed with Earth humans, saying it flies in the face of the stochastic nature of the evolutionary process. Ooh, you got him there, Carl. Yeah, the series where they travel back in time to talk to whales isn't a reliable source of real scientific information. What would I do without you? Elsewhere, while complaining that The X-Files has too many aliens in it, Sagan drops this gem. Almost never does the paranormal claim turn out to be a hoax or a psychological aberration or a misunderstanding of the natural world. Much closer to reality, as well as a much greater public service, would be an adult series, Scooby-Doo does it for children, in which paranormal claims are systematically investigated and every case is found to be explicable in prosaic terms. The idea here is that Scooby-Doo is essentially a franchise that pushes a skeptical worldview, a show that says there are no supernatural or alien elements in reality. Every mystery has a perfectly mundane explanation. While I seriously doubt Sagan was the first person to make this claim, he very well might have been the first high-profile celebrity type to do so, and it has only become more prevalent in the 30 years since he published his book. This interpretation of the franchise was pushed particularly hard by members of the online skeptic community, who are even more influenced by Sagan's work than the general population is. So, in the song Storm, from his 2009 album Ready for This, self-identified skeptic and singing comedian Tim Minchin wrote these lyrics.
If you want to watch telly, you should watch Scooby-Doo. That show was so cool because every time there was a church with a ghoul or a ghost in a school, they looked beneath the mask. And what was inside? The fucking janitor or the dude who ran the water slide. Because throughout history, every mystery ever solved has turned out to be not magic.
As someone who, unfortunately, was very active in the online skeptic community as a kid, I can't even begin to tell you just how common it was for people to bring up Scooby-Doo as a reference point. And I also can't tell you how much it annoyed me as a 12-year-old who still regularly watched Scooby-Doo. Because, well, the monsters are real sometimes. There are supernatural occurrences in Scooby-Doo. Possibly the most famous entry in the franchise after the original show is a straight-to-video movie, Zombie Island, which features zombies and werecats. How do the skeptics account for that? Well, it turns out they just reject the real monsters entries of the franchise as not real Scooby-Doo, and they've been doing that at least since Zombie Island was released. In the December 1st, 1998 issue of Skeptical Briefs, a newsletter put out by the Skeptical Inquirer, contributor Tim Madigan gave voice to his horror over the film. I was stunned, shocked, and appalled to find out that the entire thrust of the show has been changed, Tim cried. No longer do the intrepid investigators prove that the paranormal is all a ruse. It's all such a sad betrayal of the original show's glorious skeptical tradition. Thus, a new narrative was born. Scooby-Doo used to be a show about skepticism and debunking the supernatural. Then it was betrayed, corrupted, and the supernatural was allowed to enter the picture uncritically. And, for the earliest pushers of this narrative, Zombie Island was the Ides of March. But why Zombie Island? 10 years prior, Scooby-Doo met the Boo Brothers, ran a ghoul school, and saw Shaggy turn into a reluctant werewolf. Why aren't any of those marked as the point of betrayal? For the simple reason that the skeptics haven't seen those films. They don't actually know anything about the franchise. They know what someone like Carl Sagan said about the franchise, and they know it doesn't seem to be true when you actually watch it, but they aren't truly familiar with the Scooby canon. Another great example of this is an article published in The Guardian in 2017, titled "When Good TV Goes Bad, Why Scooby-Doo Went to the Dogs." In that piece, author Rich Pelly tries to blame the 2010 series Mystery Incorporated for introducing real monsters into the franchise and ruining its skeptical ethos. That's 2010. 2010. Pelly acknowledges that he is vaguely aware of real monsters appearing in the films, but says the movies don't count since Scooby started as a TV show, and he thinks Mystery Incorporated is the first TV show to break this cardinal rule. Leaving aside the fact that Pelly thinks he can wipe over 40 films from the canon with a hand wave, The 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo, which featured all kinds of real monsters and supernatural happenings, aired in 1985. 25 years before Mystery Incorporated. Again, these people just don't know what they're talking about. Despite their obvious ignorance, the skeptics seem to have won the cultural battle over the meaning of Scooby-Doo. For years, it has been the popular interpretation that Scooby-Doo was originally a show that preached skeptical values, and which only later introduced supernatural elements into the mix. This framework is so prevalent that even many educated fans of the series buy into it uncritically. Take, for example, this old video from Scott Niswander. It is all about the supposed tension that exists between these skeptical and supernatural entries in the franchise. As Scott later described it in a live stream.
So the video is about this kind of disparity, or not really disparity, a duality, I call it a duality, you get it, between these Scooby stories that take place in a genre that are incredibly supernatural. Ghosts and monsters do exist, versus Scooby stories where ghosts and monsters aren't real. They are people in costumes. Everything can be explained away with ration and reason, scientific stuff.
I don't bring this up to attack Scott in any way. I like Scott. Their video is good, and their Scooby content is easily my favorite on the platform. You should go subscribe to their channel, or subscribe to Nebula, or their podcast. Just find a way to subscribe to Scott. They're good. Instead, I bring this up to show how even intelligent and knowledgeable fans of the franchise have been infected by this skeptic reading and the narratives around a supposed split. These ideas have become so hegemonic that even someone intimately familiar with the franchise cannot see how obviously wrong they are. And now, for my next trick, I would like to show you just how obviously wrong they are. Despite claims to the contrary, the Scooby-Doo franchise has had supernatural elements since it began, from the first season of the first show, Scooby-Doo, Where Are You? In episode 2, A Clue for Scooby-Doo, the gang investigates a creepy cabin only to find materials that are seemingly used in witchcraft. Among these artifacts is a can, which, when opened, releases the sounds of hyenas laughing. This is unrelated to the mystery of the episode and never explained. Also, the episode ends with Scooby being able to inexplicably drink every beverage at the gang's shared table simply by sucking the straw in his own drink. The gang asks how it could be possible, say it's a mystery for another time, and then Scooby laughs while the credits roll. In episode 3, Hassle in the Castle, a talking skull gives Shaggy directions when he gets lost. This is never explained, and the voice of the skull is not similar to the voice of the villain of the episode. Just after this, Shaggy wishes for a sandwich, and one floats down to him. Then he asks for mustard, and that also materializes. He wonders if he could also cut the sandwich with a thought, and then an axe suddenly falls down and carves it right in half. There is never any indication that the villain of the episode was behind these strange occurrences, and there aren't any attempts to explain how they were even possible. In the context of the episode, they seem to be due to some ghost or spirit unrelated to the case at hand. In Mind Your Own Business, episode 4, Scooby sees a creepy monster through a keyhole and then it disappears when the door is opened. While this happens, the man who will eventually be unmasked as the Minor 49er is standing behind Scooby and couldn't possibly be the one beyond the keyhole. Episode 12, Scooby-Doo and a Mummy 2, features a sequence in which a mysterious drink, or potion, transforms Scooby into a frog temporarily. In the final episode of the season, That Snow Ghost, the character Fu Lan Chi, I'm sorry, that's actually their name, tells the story of how he was chased out of Tibet by the ghost of a real Yeti. Chi is not the villain and has no reason to lie. Also, it is explicitly stated that the ghost Yeti of this episode is not the same one from Chi's story, and that instead it was the Tibetan tale that inspired the thieves in our modern mystery. Further, Daphne asks Fred at one point if he believes Chi's story, and Fred basically says he has no reason not to. This seems far from the apparently hyper-realistic and scientific version of the show people choose to remember. There are other examples in the first season, many of them vague, such as the maybe voodoo, maybe coincidence scene in Which Witch is Which, where Shaggy happens to lean back into a fork just as Scooby stabs a doll of him in the same spot. The most explicit, though, comes from the penultimate episode, A Night of Fright is No Delight. At the end of this classic, the gang has just unmasked a couple of green ghosts and closed the case. Then, something extraordinary happens. Velma says that they went through a lot of trouble for a house that wasn't even haunted. Daphne replies, "Oh no? Then what's that?" A bone materializes out of thin air and hovers above the gang. Shaggy screams, "A floating haunted bone!" It drifts down and Scooby, excited, begins to chew on it. Velma remarks, "I guess haunted bones are one thing Scooby's not scared of," and the gang starts to laugh as they cheer him on. Over and over, supernatural elements appear in this first season, and the members of Mystery Inc. accept them on face value. This is not a world where magic, monsters, and ghosts don't exist. It's a world where they do, which is one of the reasons that all the costumed hoaxes are so convincing to the inhabitants of this world. If you live in a reality where ghost bones materialize out of thin air and magic potions turn you into a frog, maybe it isn't so crazy to think a haunted suit of armor is out to get you. The entire skeptical reading of the franchise melts away when confronted with the reality that Scooby-Doo was contaminated with supernatural elements from its very first incarnation. In fact, there were elements of the supernatural baked into the franchise before the first episode of the series ran. Because, I don't know if you've noticed, it's a rather underrated aspect of the series. Not many people are aware, but this is actually, a story about a fucking talking dog? It's about a talking fucking dog. Are we forgetting the talking fucking dog? That's the title? It's named after the talking dog? What am I going crazy? Well, aside from people being unfamiliar with the Scooby franchise, I also think a lot of people are simply unfamiliar with mystery fiction in general. Scooby-Doo did not invent the evildoer uses supernatural hoax to get away with a crime formula. It was a narrative structure already being explored by the early pioneers of the mystery genre. Agatha Christie's 1931 novel, The Sittaford Mystery, begins with a group of people conducting a seance and contacting a spirit that tells them about a murder, only for it to be revealed later on that the entire spiritual encounter was a hoax orchestrated by the murderer. The third, and for my money the best, Sherlock Holmes novel is The Hound of the Baskervilles, which revolves around a supposedly supernatural dog that is being used as cover for a killer. Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the book, famously believed that fairies were real, so I doubt he was thinking of spreading the glorious gospel of skepticism when he wrote it. It was just a fun, gothic angle on a kind of fiction he was already familiar with. And that's also what Scooby-Doo was. It was a fresh take on some old tropes. Every episode was a brand new Hound of the Baskervilles, but this time, the gothic setting could be contrasted with 60s flower power youth aesthetics. Scooby-Doo wasn't trying to tell you to stop believing in spirits any more than Conan Doyle was. But what's really crazy is that, since the skeptical interpretation of the franchise has become so mainstream, now you do have Scooby properties that try to incorporate that theme. Usually, they achieve this by turning Velma into the gang's token skeptic. The initial misinterpretation of the franchise has grown so powerful that it has reacted back onto the franchise itself, informing the approaches of modern artists. It's like Lennon said, "A lie told often enough becomes the truth." Except Lennon didn't say that. That's a lie, but it still gets referenced as if it's true. This is one of the least important things we've ever discussed on this channel, but I do think it's worth talking about as a cautionary tale. It shows just how blind people can become when they think they've already seen the truth. Pop culture feeds you a narrative about a work of art or a political topic or anything else, and it sinks so deep into your brain that you stop being able to process the information that is actually in front of you. That's how ideology works. It becomes invisible to you, even as it directs your experiences. It becomes so invisible that you may even start calling yourself a skeptic and a free thinker, all while uncritically parroting talking points handed down by your favorite pop science writer. People are told that Scooby-Doo was originally a show about debunking the supernatural, and that narrative is repeated so often without being challenged that it becomes common sense. Then, when people actually watch anything from the franchise, they either manage to ignore how obviously wrong that idea is, or they have to come up with weirdo cope talking points like, actually, Mystery Incorporated betrayed the true meaning of Scooby-Doo. Regardless of who actually originated this idea or how it managed to become popular, it seriously needs to die. And if we want our discussions of art, or really anything, to get better, we need to stop letting other people do our thinking for us. Forget your expectations. Forget your preconceived notions and inherited wisdoms. Forget so-called common sense. Deal with what is actually in front of you. Don't watch Scooby-Doo and think about what Carl Sagan told you it meant. Watch it and think about what it means to you.